Francis Ford Coppola removed this scene from the theatrical version of The Godfather Part 2. At first, it looks like nothing more than an extra moment left on the cutting room floor. But hidden inside these few seconds is the first sign that something about Don Fanucci wasn't what it seemed. Everyone believed Fanucci was untouchable. Vito didn't. And long before he ever pulled the trigger, he had already begun to suspect that something about Don Fanucci didn't add up. The first question is simple. Why did everyone believe Don Fanucci was untouchable? Mario Puzo describes Fanucci as a large Italian man with a fierce expression, dressed in elegant white clothes and wearing a white felt hat that made him impossible to ignore. He looked exactly like the kind of man nobody wanted to challenge. More importantly, people were convinced he had powerful connections. Merchants paid him protection money. Even small-time criminals avoided crossing his path. Very few people ever stopped to ask why. According to the novel, Fanucci claimed to belong to the Black Hand, a name that terrified Italian immigrant communities throughout New York. For the people of Little Italy, questioning him simply wasn't worth the risk, because once they accepted his authority, fear did the rest of the work. Vito initially saw the same man everyone else saw, but unlike those around him, he didn't judge Fanucci by his reputation. Instead, he watched his actions. And before long, small details began to contradict the image Fanucci had carefully built. Vito's first reason to doubt Fanucci wasn't something he heard, it was something he saw. 3 young men corner Fanucci in broad daylight. One of them slashes his throat from ear to ear. The wound isn't deep enough to kill him, but it's enough to send him running through the streets, trying to stop the bleeding with his own hat. At first, this scene seems to exist for only one reason. It explains the scar on Fanucci's neck, a detail the theatrical version never explains. But the scar isn't what caught Vito's attention. It was something else, something far more important. Later, Vito asks Genco what happened. Nothing about the conversation seems unusual, but listen carefully to the questions Vito asks, because they reveal that he is already looking at Fanucci very differently from everyone else.
I bet you don't know what happened.
No, Jack. Che succede?
A few guys from over on 9th Street grabbed Fanucci. They cut his throat from ear to ear.
No, non sapevo. What? Morì?
Perciò non sono assassini. Solo fecero per fare lo scandalo, sai?
They make him look bad, you know?
Un paese nostro con 51 è meglio con leva in mezzo.
Magari l'avessi fatto, chissà. Tu sai che io si piace 50 scudo in una coscione di mio padre la settimana. Capito?
How can you kill a man like Fanucci?
Perché?
Perché?
Perché? Io sono un contenente.
Un contenente? Tu sai che io avevo le spade accopolate.
Ma stiamo lì l'anno scorso. Tu aspetta per vedere cosa succede con questo piccolo di nuovo, sai? Domenica, signor.
The key to this conversation isn't what Genco says, it's Vito's response. When Genco explains that the boys only wanted to scare Fanucci, Vito immediately replies, "In my town, if you attack a man, you'd better finish him off." On the surface, it sounds like an odd remark, but that single sentence tells us exactly how Vito sees the world. He isn't thinking about New York. He's thinking about Sicily. When Vito was still a boy, Don Ciccio murdered his father after he refused to submit to his authority. Then his brother, then his mother, and finally, he tried to have Vito killed as well. That was the world Vito came from. A real mafia boss didn't ignore public defiance. He made sure no one would ever dare challenge him again. Which is why Genco's story immediately sounded wrong. 3 young men attacked Don Fanucci in broad daylight. They nearly killed him. Days passed, and nothing happened. No retaliation, no consequences. That wasn't how real power worked. And from that moment on, Vito stopped judging Don Fanucci by what people said about him. He began judging him by what he actually did. Once Vito began questioning Don Fanucci, he kept watching. And the more he watched, the more inconsistencies he found. Fanucci hadn't convinced anyone to follow him. He had simply frightened people into obeying. As Vito's new business with Clemenza and Tessio began to grow, Fanucci approached him on the street. He demanded a share of their profits. Otherwise, he threatened to report them to the police. That single threat immediately stood out to Vito. A man who truly ruled Little Italy wouldn't need the police to enforce his authority. Then came another discovery. Vito knew 2 bookies who paid nothing to Don Fanucci, and yet nothing happened to them. If Fanucci really possessed the influence everyone believed he had, how was that possible? The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. But before taking that risk, he needed proof. And there was only one way to get it. He had to make Don Fanucci reveal who he really was. By now, Vito had almost reached his conclusion, but almost wasn't enough. If he was wrong, his family would pay the price. Before risking everything, he needed one final answer. He decided to test him. Instead of paying $600, he would offer Fanucci only $100. He wanted to see how Fanucci would react. For a man with the status Fanucci had built, this was an open challenge. If Fanucci truly possessed the powerful connections everyone believed he had, this was where they would finally appear. Instead, something very different happened. Fanucci accepted the money. He smiled, and then he offered Vito a job. That single conversation confirmed everything Vito had suspected. A man with real authority would never have accepted that offer. Don Fanucci did. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Fanucci's influence depended on what people believed about him, not on what he could actually do. Now, Vito finally had his proof. The rest of the story is well known. No powerful allies came looking for revenge. No one came to avenge Don Fanucci, because Vito had been right from the very beginning. With Fanucci gone, Little Italy expected someone else to take his place, but what happened was very different. People didn't follow Vito because they feared him. They followed him because they trusted him. Whenever someone needed help, they came to Vito. Whenever a dispute had to be settled, they came to Vito. Whenever a family had nowhere else to turn, they came to Vito. Not because he demanded respect, because he had earned it. Without threats, without extortion, without convincing anyone he was powerful. That was the difference between Don Fanucci and Don Vito Corleone. In the end, Don Fanucci's greatest lie wasn't the story he told about himself. It was making an entire neighborhood believe that reputation and power were the same thing. Vito Corleone was the first man to understand they weren't. And from that moment on, his rise became inevitable. But he was still far from becoming the Don we see in Sicily years later. If you want to see how this quiet young father became the man who finally faced Don Ciccio, that's the story in the next video.